This is English shorthand dictation number 148 and the dictation speed is 140 words per minute. Ready? Start. I desire to congratulate the Constituent Assembly on accomplishing a task of such large magnitude. It is not my purpose to appraise the value of the work that the Assembly has done or the merits and demerits of the Constitution which it has framed. I am content to leave that to others and to posterity. I shall attempt only to point out some of its salient features and the method which we have followed in framing the Constitution. Before I do that, I would like to mention some facts which will show the tremendousness of the task which we undertook some 3 years ago. If you consider the population with which the Assembly has had to deal, you will find that it is more than the population of the whole of Europe excluding Russia. The countries of Europe have never been able to join together even in a confederacy, much less under one unitary government. Here, in spite of the size of the population and the country, we have succeeded in framing a constitution which covers the whole of it. Apart from the size, there were other difficulties which were inherent in the problem itself. We have got many communities living in this country. We have got many languages prevalent in different parts of this country. We have got other kinds of differences dividing the people in the different parts from one another. We had to make provision not only for areas which are advanced educationally and economically. We had also to make provision for backward people like the tribes and for backward areas like the tribal areas. The communal problem had been one of the knottiest problems which the country has had before it for a pretty long time. The second roundtable conference failed because the communal problem could not be solved. The subsequent history of the country is too recent to require narration here, but we know this that as a result the country has had to be divided and we have lost two big portions in the northeast and northwest. Another problem of great magnitude was the problem of the Indian states. When the British came to India, they did not conquer the country as a whole or at one stroke. They got bits of it from time to time. The bits which came into their direct possession and control came to be known as British India, but a considerable portion remained under the rule and control of the Indian princes. The British thought at the time that it was not necessary or profitable for them to take direct control of those territories, and they allowed the old rulers to continue subject to their suzerainty, but they entered into various kinds of treaties and engagements with them. We had near 600 states covering more than 1/3 of the territory of India and 1/4 of the population of the country. They varied in size from small tiny principalities to big states like Mysore, Hyderabad, Kashmir, etc. When the British decided to leave this country, they transferred power to us. But at the same time, they also declared that all the treaties and engagements they had with the princes had lapsed. The paramountcy which they had so long exercised and by which they could keep the princes in order also lapsed. The Indian government was then faced with the problem of tackling these states which had different traditions of rule, some of them having some form of popular representation in assemblies and some having no semblance of anything like that and governing completely autocratically. As a result of the declaration that the treaties with the princes had lapsed, it became open to any prince or any combination of princes to assume independence and even to enter into negotiations with any foreign power and thus become islands of independent territory within the country. There were geographical and other compulsions which made it physically impossible for most of them to go against the government of India, but constitutionally it had become possible. Hence, the Constituent Assembly, at the very beginning of its labors, had to enter into negotiations with them to bring their representatives into the Assembly so that a constitution might be framed in consultation with them. The first efforts were successful, and some of them did join this assembly at an early stage, but others hesitated. It is not necessary to pry into the secrets of what was happening in those days behind the scenes. It will be sufficient to state that when the Indian Independence Act came into force, almost all of them, with two notable exceptions of Kashmir and Hyderabad, had acceded to India. Kashmir soon after followed the example of others and acceded. There were standstill agreements with all of them, including Hyderabad, which continued the status quo. As times passed, it became apparent that it was not possible, at any rate, for the smaller states to maintain their separate independent existence, and then a process of integration with India started. In course of time, not only have all the smaller states come together and become integrated with some province or other of India, but some of the larger ones also have joined. Many states have formed unions of their own, and such unions have become part of the Indian Union. It must be said, to the credit of the princes and the people of the states and far-sighted guidance of Sardar Patel, that by the time we have been able to pass this constitution, the states are now more or less in the same position as the provinces, and it has become possible to describe all of them, including the Indian states and the provinces, as states in the constitution. The announcement which has been made just now by Sardar Patel makes the position very clear, and now there is no difference between the states and the provinces in the new constitution. It has taken us 3 years to complete this work, but when we consider the work that has been accomplished and the number of days that we have spent in framing this constitution, we have no reason to be sorry for the time spent. It has enabled the apparently intractable problem of the states and the communal problem to be solved. What had proved insoluble at the Round Table Conference and had resulted in the division of the country has been solved with the consent of all parties concerned. At first, we were able to get rid of separate electorates which had poisoned our political life for so many years, but reservation of seats for the communities which enjoyed separate electorates before had to be conceded, although on the basis of their population, and not by giving additional representation on account of the so-called historical and other superiority claimed by some of the communities. It has become possible only because the constitution was not passed earlier that even reservation of seats has been given up by the communities concerned, and so our constitution does not provide for reservation of seats on communal basis, but for reservation only in favor of two classes of people in our population, namely the depressed classes who are Hindus and the tribal people, on account of their backwardness in education and in other respects. I therefore see no reason to be apologetic about the delay. The method which the Constituent Assembly adopted in connection with the Constitution was first to lay down its terms of reference in the form of an objective resolution which was moved by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru in an inspiring speech, and which constitutes now the preamble to our Constitution. It then proceeded to appoint a number of committees to deal with different aspects of the constitutional problem. I have only to add that they all worked in a business-like manner and produced reports which were considered by the Assembly, and their recommendations were adopted as the basis on which the draft of the Constitution had to be prepared. It may interest the honorable members to know that the public were taking great interest in its proceedings, and I have discovered that not less than 50,000 visitors were admitted to the visitors gallery during the period when the Constitution was under consideration. I do not attach much importance to the complaint which is sometimes made that the Constitution has become too bulky.